Hello learners and welcome back. Now, I've just changed my channel name from The Geek to The Revolution, and that is because I have a dream, and that dream is to bring a revolution to the educational society of India, to the education system that we have currently. I want to change it completely. So that is why I believe that it is like a kind of the really major work, and it would be like a kind of revolution. So you can say basically that I want to bring a revolution to the Indian education system. And you, my friends and followers and supporters, whatever you might like to call yourself, are my revolutionaries and a part of this greater revolution to change our education society, our education culture. And one day we will definitely do it. So bear on. Now, this video might be a little bit long. Why? Because it consists of almost 21 and a half pages of notes. Yeah, which wouldn't have taken me so much time to make if I hadn't been playing games all day. Now, seriously. So, let's start without much ado. So, the first, these are all, we'll be talking about all the acts that were passed after the revolution of 1857, the revolt, sorry, not revolution, my mind was stuck on that word. So after the revolt of 1857, the government of Britain now took direct control into their own hands and abolished the East India Company. Did you go get lost? We are not leaving India to in your bad hands now. We will leave India in our bad hands now. So they passed a series of acts, and we will be discussing these acts one by one now. So the first act was Government of India Act of 1858. It was also known as the Act for the Good Government of India. Now, this act abolished East India Company in India completely and transferred all of its powers, territories, and revenues directly to the British Crown. So, I guess this much is easily comprehensible. I don't need to explain it in details, right? So these are the features of the act. Now wherever I put points like 1, 2, 3, 4, wherever I put such markings, these are the features of the act, things that were actually written inside the act. And wherever I mark these stars, so this is the additional information that I have written here for you to make it easy to understand the features of the acts. These stars are just like a kind of helpful assistant, you can say assistive descriptions that help you easily understand the acts. And of course all these notes will be provided in a PDF form in the description. So if you don't want to watch the video, you can directly read from there, but still I would say you do watch the video in case you skip something or don't understand something. So the first point, as the first feature of this act was provided that India henceforth was to be governed in the name of Her Majesty. And wherever I put these inverted commas, remember it means that I want to put stress on that particular word. So if you're not watching the video, if you're just reading the notes, and suddenly you are confused at why I have put so many inverted commas all over my notes, so it means that I want to put stress on that particular word or on that particular sentence, and that is why I have put it under inverted commas. So the first act said, and of course if I want to say this thing as it is, that's why also I might be using the inverted commas. So the first feature was that it provided that India from now on would be governed in the name of Her Majesty. Now what does in the name means? In the name means that all the official documents or all the official work would be done like with India would be seen to be done in the name of Her Majesty. Like in the all the official documents, it would be shown that India is being ruled or India is being governed by Her Majesty or His Majesty directly. It means India is a possession of the King of Britain. Okay, so basically they're just trying to say that the company has no right over India now, and it is completely a possession, mind the word, possession of the British Prime Minister, sorry, not Prime Minister, the British monarch or the British king, or at that time I guess it was the queen. Now the second feature is changed the designation of Governor General of India to Viceroy of India. Now I know it says that it changed the designation but you can still find that many books or many online sources still refer to the Viceroy of India as the Governor General of India. I mean, they use both these terms interchangeably. So you can basically say that the Viceroy of India held both the titles of the Governor General of India and the Viceroy of India. However, the Governor General of India was not officially used, I think, after this act was passed. But still, many people and many online sources can still refer to the Viceroy of India as the Governor General of India. So, just in case, don't get confused. Viceroy was the direct representative of the British Crown India. Now, all of you know this. It means that whatever the Viceroy said was taken to be said by the British Crown, that is, by the British ruler himself. He was a direct representative. Like, I think you can understand, like, the monitor is kind of a representative of the class. I mean, the monitor is not that representative of the class. To take another example, I don't know example, but just move on with it. I hope you understand this point, what it means. So second is Lord Canning was the first viceroy. Now to remember his name, just remember that Canning used to have a big cane with which he beat our great revolutionaries of 1857. I mean, they mercilessly killed them all, of course, with guns. But still, you can just try to remember for convenience sake that Canning used to beat the revolutionaries with cane. So right after the revolution was the revolution was suppressed, Lord Canning was made the first viceroy because he beat the Indians with cane, and the British were happy with it. That wow, you beat the Indians with cane, you are very good at it. So now we make you the viceroy, and that is why Lord Canning became the first viceroy. Canning. Just try to match them up, and I hope you'll remember it. No hard feelings for the revolutionaries, of course. I respect them in all senses. It's just to make you understand that the British didn't respect them, and of course, to also help you remember the names easily. Now, the third point is it abolished board of control and court of directors. Now, if you've seen the previous video, and if you haven't seen, you just go back and see it. Sorry, I know I posted it 17 days ago, but still, it'd be better if you go back and see it. So, in the previous acts, a board of control and court of directors were created, right? Board of control was held government representatives, and the court of directors held the company representatives. So it was like a kind of dual form of governance between them. The board of control consisted of the British government officials, and court of directors consisted of the shareholders of the company, that is, private individuals. So it abolished both of these boards from in this act. Both these boards were abolished because obviously the company itself was ended. It was completely abolished, so there was no need for a court of direct now, and board of control was also removed to make things simple, I guess. Now the fourth feature is it created a new office, and the name of this office was Secretary of State for India. SOS for India. SOS, not save my soul, but Secretary of State for India, and it vested with him, or with his office, you can say, complete authority and control over the Indian administration. So he had complete authority and control over this Indian administration, this new office, the Secretary of State for India. But whoever this new, I mean, mostly there were only guys, or you can say every one of them was a guy. So I will just refer to him simply as him. So this new guy, the Secretary of State for India, he had complete control over the Indian subcontinent. So now you must be wondering that if he has all the control and he handles all the Indian administration, then why is the viceroy there? I mean, is he just sitting back and chilling in India while he's handling all the things? Of course not. They had some kind of different duties, which I'll explain later in the video. But just for now, understand that Secretary of State for India was vested. It didn't mean that he had to, I mean, it's just saying that he had the right to uh, practice any kind of power, to exercise any power in the Indian subcontinent, in the any administrative power. So it didn't mean that the viceroy didn't have these powers. The viceroy also had them, and he also had the right to exercise those powers. And the Secretary of State for India also had the right to exercise those powers. Now it's 2 a.m. in the night, and I'm making this video. I'm feeling so sleepy already. Now moving on. Secretary of State was a member of the British cabinet. It means that he was a member from the British government, and he was responsible to the British Parliament. This is another, it's not a feature, it's just a helping point. Again here you can say it's HP, like Harry Potter helping point. So Viceroy reported directly to the Secretary of State for India, though he was not inferior to him. Now the Viceroy reported about his workings, about his actions and everything directly to the Secretary of State for India. Now one point to be noted here is that the Secretary of State for India, he did not have his office in India. So you can basically say that he never visited India. He had his office in London, so he had no clue what was happening in India and whatever. And Viceroy, I believe that he was in India, he resided in India, so he actually handled all the administration and all the working of the country and reported all of it to Secretary of State. Now you might be wondering that it means that Secretary of State is a bigger post, right? Because the Viceroy is handling all the work and he is reporting to the Secretary of State. But no, Secretary of State and Viceroy, there was no inferior or superior, they were both equal posts. Again, moving on, Viceroy of India was appointed. Now you might be confused how they are equal posts and how that and all that. I know there are lots of confusions. There might be, because I myself was confused so much, and that's why I took a deep dive into all of this information and wrote all of it in a very detailed manner. And you will all of your confusions, all of your doubts will be removed by the end of this video, because I've actually written all of this thing later on. So Viceroy of India was appointed by the British Crown or monarch directly. It means he wasn't contested through some elections or something. He was directly appointed by the British Crown. It means like if the British Crown had some good friendship with the guy, so let's say come on, you want to be the Viceroy of India, and he says, yeah, all right, I'll take you on that offer. And then suddenly the British monarch appoints his friend as the Viceroy of India. This thing could be done. I mean, he had every right to do it, but I don't think it was put into practice, or at least not so much. Now another helping point, HP. Secretary of State for India was responsible for the policy formation related to India and oversaw their implementation, while Viceroy of India was responsible for their execution and maintained diplomatic relations of British India with rulers of other princely states. Now, in case you do not understand this, let me explain to you, which is my job, of course, to develop your minds and help you think in a better way, so that you can bring about a revolution in our education system, and not just Indian education system, the whole world, if I can. So moving on, the Secretary of State for India. So basically, the Secretary of State for India, he was responsible for policy formation. It means he decided which policies, which rules, which acts will be implemented in India, and how they would be implemented. It meant how they would take place, like which officer would have what kind of power, and which officer would supersede or be inferior to which officer, or how the official work would actually take place, what would be the what's that word, I can't remember that. Yeah, what would be the formalities, the official formalities that need to be taken, that need to take place before a particular thing is done, and all of that fell to the Secretary of State for India's lot. Now, what was the job of the Viceroy then? It's again confusing, right? So the Viceroy was actually the executive head. So the Viceroy had the duty that he needed to be responsible that all of these policies that were drafted, that were created by the Secretary of State for India, that is SOS for India, were actually being implemented. So he was responsible for their execution. He checked that all of these policies were properly implemented, and they were put into action. And then he reported all of it to the Secretary of State, the SOS of India for India. Now this is, I've given a list of all the states that were under British India, that were a part of British India in 1858. Present day here denotes that these are the present day names of those states. Obviously, like it could be, let's take for example that Bihar and Odisha and West Bengal were one huge state under the name of West Bengal only, but now they are three parts. Okay, this is just for an example, it's not like it actually was, I'm just taking an example. So I've written their present day names and if they were a part of the British India or not. Now this was in 1858, and then I've given another list which is of 1947, when our country became independent. So just so you can match them up, and if you want you can remember all these names, it's just a kind of reference. So moving on to our fifth feature, it's that it established a 15-member Council of India to assist Secretary of State. Now this act also established a council which consisted on 15 members, and it was known. Now this is not to stress the Council of India, this is the exact name. The name is Council of India. Now this Council of India was made to assist Secretary of State. Now assist, the word is important, and why I will tell you later a bit. Another helping point, HP, Harry Potter, yeah. Secretary of State was made chairman of the council. Obviously he was made chairman of the council. It means he was actually head of the council, and the council was not his head. Council of India was an advisory body. Now this advisory body and assist, they are actually in, oh my god, what a mosquito. They are actually in very good harmony, this advisory and assist. Why? Because it means that the Secretary of State was not bound to follow the suggestions or follow whatever the Council of India said. It means it aided him, it could advise him, but he was not in any way bound to listen to any of the 15 members of the Council of India. Like the 15 members are sitting like with their closed mouths and saying, "Oh, so why are we sitting here? Are we dumb people? Are we dumb ducks, right? We're just sitting here saying things, blah 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 blah, discussing issues all day, and in the end you say, oh, come on, man, I'm not listening to any of you, get shit." So, like that. It means like they were kind of like sitting fools. You can say, if at the end of the day suddenly the SOS for India decides that he's not going to listen to them, and then he's like, they're like completely frustrated and start calling him names behind his back, of course. So moving on now, the sixth point is that it constituted the Secretary of State in Council. Now Secretary of State, if you've read, if you've seen my previous video, it means that when the Secretary of State for India, that is SOS for India, is working in the presence or is officially working with his council, then he is referred to as Secretary of State in Council. And now this, and when the Secretary of State, when this body that is Secretary of State for India plus his council, it was constituted as a body, it was made into a body corporate. Now this body corporate was capable of suing. It means it could sue others, and it could also be sued by others. I hope you know what sue means, the word. If you don't know, I'm definitely not going to explain this one, because you must have at least this much of general knowledge. So what is body corporate now? So it made, so basically let me explain it again. The sixth feature means that it converted, or you can say that it made the secretary, the body consists of the Secretary of State for India and his council. So this is one whole body, and this act made this one body into a corporate, into a body corporate. Okay. So like, say it said that whenever the Secretary of State and his council is working together, they would be considered as a body corporate. Now what is body corporate? So body corporate is a group or organization that has a separate identity like a person. So it is treated as one whole and not like parts, or like whenever you look at a company, it's made up of different members, different shareholders, right? But imagine a company where the company is referred to as him or her or it. Like the company is treated as a particular entity, a particular person, and not something that is made up of people, but a complete person himself. Just like our organs constitute our body, and then we treat this group of organs as a body, right? Similarly, imagine a company which consists of different organs, and we treat the company as a complete body now, not a group of organs, but a complete separate entity, a body. Body corporate is treated as a whole, one thing, and not as a group of several members. Body corporate is more like a company which has its own management, and its shareholders do not possess the ownership of it. So you can say that the body corporate has its own management system, it has its managers, its workers and all, and it also has its shareholders, but the shareholders do not possess the ownership of the company. So you might be wondering, like, who started the company, then who has the actual ownership of the company? So nobody has the actual ownership of the company. Whoever started it, now his ownership is gone, blank da. of it and can withdraw anytime. So the you can say that the shareholders, they do not own the company, and they can sell their shares, or they can just blank out from the company anytime, the body corporate anytime. Body corporate is considered an individual, so it is considered as a separate complete identity. It means it's not considered like it's a group of people, and the group of people can be sued. It's taken as a complete one entity, one whole body, and the whole body would be sued if sued. Entity which have its own legal rights and responsibilities. I hope I made it clear, this body corporate, and even if I didn't, I did my best. I couldn't have done a better job, I think. And still, if you didn't get what body corporate is, it's not that important either. I told you I'm just trying to open up your brains, expand your mind's limitations, help you understand things in a better way. But if you didn't understand, it's not that important from the examination point of view or from UPSC's point of view. So now next, moving on to our second act, that is the Indian Councils Act of 1861. Now this act was mainly put to incorporate Indians into the administrative system. Now this the main point of this act was so that more Indians could be added into the administrative system, and obviously it was not for our own good, it was for their own good, because they wanted to rule us by ourselves, but being the rulers themselves. I know it's pretty confusing, but what I mean here is that they wanted to understand how we will be ruled in a better way. They wanted to make ruling us more efficient. So they put Indians into this work because Indians knew Indians better, and they would help the Britishers to rule us more easily and efficiently. This was basically a method set up to rule Indians with the help of Indians. Wow, I've already written it. I'm a genius. So the first point, or the first feature of this act, is it provided that the Viceroy nominates some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. Alright, so we know that the Viceroy had a council, alright. So I mean, we didn't know that the Viceroy had a council. I didn't tell you the Viceroy had a council now, did I? So obviously, we'll read it later again. So obviously now this act clearly says that the Viceroy had a council, and now this act wanted the Viceroy to nominate some Indians who would be non-official members of his expanded council. Now the council of the Viceroy was actually expanded, it was increased, and in this increased council, some people had to be Indians, and these would be non-official members. The first non-official members were, it's very easily actually to remember them, Raja, Maharaja, and later Sir. Raja, Maharaja, Sir. So first is Raja, Raja of where? Banaras. Second is Maharaja, Raja, Maharaja of where? Patiala, like Patiala, Punjab. You can remember Patiala and Punjab easily, like they are very connected. And last is Sir Dinkar Rao. It's a very catchy name, to be honest, Sir Dinkar Rao. So Raja of Banaras. Suddenly imagine those rivers and temples of Banaras, and then imagine Maharaja of Patiala. Like Patiala and Pepsi sound very similar suddenly, right? Imagine the Maharaja of Patiala drinking Pepsi, and when you form these images into your mind, you'll be able to easily remember these names. That's what I'm trying to say. So now, what is actually the meaning of non-official? Now, non-official members had the right to participate in debates and discussions, and these mosquitoes, and express their views, but they had very little voting rights and very little say in the actual implementation of the law. So when a law was introduced, they could openly debate, they can say that we don't like this law, we don't like that, but their views were not actually counted. So when, if the Britishers decided that it doesn't matter if we don't like this law, or if it has these many repercussions, we are still moving on with it, and the Indians, or you can say the non-official members, refused that no, you shouldn't put this law, and this law is not good, and we vote against it. So obviously they had no voting right in the first place, so their views wouldn't be counted. The British could still move on with the law. Now second point or feature is restored the legislative powers to the presidencies of Bombay and Madras. So if you have seen the previous video, you should know that the legislative powers of both Bombay and Madras were taken away from them. Obviously it has only now one point that I might need to make clear here is that it has only abolished the the English East India Company, the Court of Directors and Board of Controls. Rest all of the previous rules and regulations and acts, they are working as it is. All right. So it's not like it has completely removed all the previous act and all those regulations and everything from that. It has the after the British government assumed control, it removed only the company and the Court of Directors and Board of Control, not all the previous acts also. All right. So this point is important. So now through this act, it again restored the legislative powers to the presidencies of Bombay and Madras. The third feature is it provided for the establishment of new legislative councils also. And where were these new legislative councils? So wherever the wherever I've written provided means it like it commanded or it ordered or it said that there needs to be this. It doesn't mean that it took effect immediately, right? It's not a thing of with immediate effect. Provided here means that it said that this should be done, but there was not a kind of like time limit that it should be done within this amount of time or this amount of time. And that is why the legislative councils were created in first for Bengal. It was created in 1862. We're talking about the Indian Councils Act of 1861, which came out in 1861. However, the legislative council for firstly Bengal was created in 1862. For northwestern provinces, it was created in 1886. And lastly, for Punjab, it was created in 1897. Now, fourth feature here, it empowered the Viceroy to set guidelines and procedures to facilitate the conduct of business within the council. The Act also recognized the portfolio system, which was introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. So it gave the Viceroy power that he can set guidelines and procedures to how business within the council will take place. Like if they obviously had their own needs, like they want to buy something from some organization, or like they want to provide them some work, obviously they couldn't do everything by themselves, right? Suppose they want the formation of some roads or bridges or railway system, so they had business dealings with other private individuals, right? So for these business dealings, for these business within the council, the Viceroy had complete authority to set any guideline or any particular procedure that he wanted to. And this act also recognized the portfolio system, which was introduced by our first Viceroy, Lord Canning, in 1859. Now, what was this portfolio system? The portfolio system involved assigning a specific department or area of government administration to each member of the Viceroy's council, and they had the authority to make final decisions and issue orders within their respective areas of responsibility on behalf of the council. So nowadays, you know that we have a home minister, we have a finance minister, we have a railways minister, a road and transport minister, right? So this is when it all started. This portfolio system started it all. It said that we create several different departments like defense, education, finance, and hand over each of these departments to one of the members of the Viceroy's council, and they will have complete authority. They will have the final decision making power in their respective departments. Like all the below officers and all the workers below them would have to listen to them completely, and they would like have the final authority, the final say in it, right? So like we have finance minister today, so obviously he doesn't know dumb shit about finance, but all the people working under him, all the officers working under him, to have to listen to him completely. He has the complete final say. We have a defense minister who doesn't know shit about defense and all that military and stuff, but the army generals have to finally in the end listen to the defense minister, right? So this was the portfolio system. And they are saying that they had to be member of the Viceroy's council. In today's time, they have to be cabinet ministers. It's basically the same thing, right? So nowadays, cabinet ministers are made heads of these departments. At that time, the Viceroy's council members were made heads of the departments. And just like today, how the ministers have the final say in all of the working of their department, at that time too, those ministers or those members of the council had the final say in their own departments. I guess it makes it pretty clear. So now moving on to the fifth point, it empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances without the agreement of the Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such an ordinance was 6 months. So it gave the viceroy that you can issue ordinance. It gave the power. It gave power to the viceroy that you go. So this act seems to give a lot of powers to the viceroy, right? It gave power to the viceroy that you issue ordinance, and you don't even need to agree with the legislative council. You don't need to, like, the council of the secretary of state for India, his council was an advisory body, but not the viceroy's council. We never said that the viceroy's council was also just an advisory body and he didn't have to listen to him, listen to it, right? It was for the secretary of state, but the viceroy had to listen to its council. But in this case, in this special case, during an emergency, the viceroy could issue ordinance and he didn't even have to have a meeting or agree with his legislative council. However, the life of such an ordinance was only 6 months. Now let us understand what an ordinance is. So ordinance is basically a law or regulation that has the force of law. So it's basically the same as a law, similar to an act of the legislative council. It's very similar to how, like, a complete legislative council sits up and passes an act. It is very similar to that. So it means that it has the same power as that of an actual act. However, they can be put into action by the executive without the prior approval of the legislative council. However, these are acts, because act is something that is passed in the legislative council, right? Act is a, you can say act is a kind of rule that is passed in the legislative council and now needs to be applied to the citizens. But ordinances are also rules that need to be followed by all the citizens, but they need not have been passed by a legislative council. So they have all the force, they have all the powers of an act, but they are not actually an act because they are not passed by the legislative council. And that is why these ordinances are actually temporary. So in short, it is a temporary law passed by the viceroy on his own. And now moving on, now comes our second Indian Council Act, that is Indian Councils Act of 1892. So the first feature of it was it increased the number of non-official members in the Central Legislative Assembly. So this point we noted that in the previous act we introduced non-official members, and in this act we are increasing their numbers. Alright, so previously we had 3 non-official members, now we would have even more non-official members. Second point is introduced. Now this is to be noted that it introduced non-official members at the provincial legislative council. So the previous act had introduced non-official members at the central legislative council, and this act introduces non-official members at the provincial legislative councils while increasing the numbers of non-official members at the central legislative council. The provinces also had their 2 councils, right, if you remember. So feature third is it increased the capacity of the official members of all legislative councils. So it also increased the numbers of the official members too at both central and provincial level. Fourth feature is, I think these features are already very easy to understand. I can't find anything that I should explain even further because I've already written, I know these are actually written in a very complex language in the book, so I've just all simplified it. So the fourth feature is it increased the powers of the legislative council, mostly the provincial legislative council. It gave more or further powers to the legislative council, especially to the provincial legislative councils. Fifth feature is provincial legislative councils were given powers to discuss and debate the annual budget. So before this, the provincial legislators, they have no say in how much money they would be given or how the budget would be prevented. Everything was taken care of by the central legislative councils, that is the viceroy's council. But after this act, even the provincial legislative council had their own say in the budget, that we want this, or please do this, or please we are in need of this. Previously they could not even discuss or debate about it, that what their needs are or what they want, but now they could discuss their needs. They were also given the right to address, oh shit, I haven't written it actually, so just let's skip this point. Let's just skip it. Damn, embarrassing. So moving on to the sixth point, provided for the nomination of some non-official members of the first. So this act also said that we will nominate some non-official members. So previously, the non-official members were chosen by the viceroy himself, like he could pick up anyone. But this time they said that we will nominate. The members will vote and they will choose the non-official members at Central Legislative Council by the viceroy on the recommendation of the provincial legislature. So previously the viceroy could pick up anyone and appoint him a non-official member of his council, but now to appoint him a non-official member of the Central Legislative Council, that is his own council, he could recommend a name. No, he could recommend a name, which was like he couldn't recommend a name. Actually, he had to pick a name which was recommended by the provincial legislative councils and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. So provincial, it means all the legislative councils of different provincials and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, they would discuss and they would give some names to the viceroy, and the viceroy would choose some names out of them and appoint them as the non-official members of the legislative councils. This was the procedure to appoint someone at the Central Legislative Council. Now to appoint someone at provincial legislative councils by the governors on the recommendation. So the governor were the rulers of the provinces. If I haven't told you, I'm telling you now that the governors or the rulers of the provinces, obviously they came under the viceroy definitely. But we have state ministers, so the governors you can compare them with state ministers. So the governor had to choose members, the non-official members of the provincial legislative councils on the recommendations of the district boards, municipalities, universities, trade associations, zamindars, chambers. What the fuck? So seriously, this was a really complex process for the governors. The governors had a real shitload in their head. They had to go through such a complex process and be like, oh man, why am I even doing this? So so all of these would, I mean, the real problem would be with these municipalities, university and trade association. They would have to get together, set up different days and all that functions, and then they finally decide, okay, we want these people to be the non-official members, and they discuss and debate and they'd abuse each other and say, no, I want my relative to be the non-official member. He'd say, don't, no dude, this is my time. This time I want my relative to be the non-official member. I want my son-in-law to be the non-official member. I want my daughter, come on, hey, we have no woman right, get out of here. So it would be something like this, and then finally they choose upon it, and they would recommend those names to the governors, and then the governor would pick some members of his own choice out of them and then appoint them. Moving on to another act, the third or fourth, I think this is the fourth act, right? Yeah, this must be the fourth act. So Indian Councils Act of 1909. Now remember the dates. It's very easy to remember the dates. Let me tell you from the starting. The first is obviously 1858, just 1 year after the revolution. Then the second date is 1861. So 1 and 1 is same. You just need to remember the number 86. 1 same, and just remember 86. So 1861. Then the second act, the third act is 1 is always same. Obviously everyone knows that it is the year 18, so 1 will always be here. Then 8 9, and then here is 1 2, 1 2 8 9. This forms a kind of pattern, right? 1 2 8 9. So after 1 comes 2, so 1 and 2 are in the last, and in the middle after 8 comes 9, 8 9. So 1892. It's easy to remember, okay? And finally the third date is the easiest. So it has 1909. So 909. So 10, 1 and then 9, and then 0 and then 9. Alright. I mean, you can form these kind of patterns and just try to remember them. That it even feels so fun, so funny and silly and enjoyable at the same time. So now the Indian Council Act of 1909, they were also known as the Monte-Millo or Morley-Minto reforms. It's basically the same thing. You can either write it as Minto-Morley or Morley-Minto reforms. So this act was proposed by Lord Morley, who was at that time the Secretary of State for India, and Lord Minto, who was at that time the Viceroy of India. So let's discuss the features of this act now. So the first feature, it once again increased the size. Now we are increasing the size, maybe the third time, I hope. It once again increased the size of the legislative councils very considerably. So it highly increased the size of the legislative councils, because I guess Indians had started on their population spurt and all that shit, that started making babies for crazy, and it increased the population, and they thought that maybe more representation is needed in the legislative assemblies because the Indians won't stop making babies, man, what the hell. So they had to again increase the size of the legislative councils, and by a very considerable number at both the central and provincial levels, as I've already written it. Now HP, Harry Potter or helping point. Central Legislative Council, the number of members of Central Legislative Council were increased from 16 to 60. You can say such a considerable amount of increase. Second, HP, members of provincial legislature. So you can also remember these HPs as life givings, like these are your life savers. They help you remember the or understand the point. So they are HP, like they are a small portion of HP to you. I'm giving you some HP to restore your HP. Yeah. So second HP is members of provincial legislative councils were not uniform. So now we don't know the increase of size in the provincial legislative councils. Why? Because each provincial legislative council had different amount of different kind number of members. Like the Madras Legislative Council can have 80 members, or the Bombay Legislative Council could have 65 members. So they all had different members, right? So we don't know the exact number of members that were increased in them. That's why. Now third HP, I give you one more HP here. You take more HP. Retained the same official majority in the central councils only. However, it retained the same official majority, that this much amount would be the official members and this much number would be the non-official members. Like I told you that it increased the number of members of both official and non-official, but non-official members and official members were in the same proportion, you can say, were in the same ratio. Now the second point is enlarge the deliberative functions of the legislative councils at both levels. So it enlarged, it increased the number of functions of the legislative councils at both the same level. Deliberative is just a fancy word used here, it doesn't mean anything much. It you can just skip the word completely if you wish. So basically it means that it increased the number of functions or the powers that the legislative assemblies had at both provincial and central level. Now one more HP to understand this point. Members were now allowed to ask supplementary questions, move resolutions on budget, etc. So previously the members were like, they were just sitting puppets there. They didn't have much of a say. Mostly the viceroy decided by himself, and they did, oh yeah, yes sir, okay sir, yeah, good sir, well sir. But now they've given more powers, like they could debate, they could discuss more, they could ask supplementary questions, they could even move resolution that we are against this. Previously if they were against this, the viceroy could still go with it. I mean, the viceroy was you can say formality. It was a formality for the viceroy to sit in his council, discuss and debate the issues. But again, once again, like he was not kind of very bound to listen to all them. It was a kind of formality that he had to show officially that I discussed it with my council, and my council and I think this way, even if 80% of the council doesn't think that way. But the governor general is the super boss, and he'd say, I'd kick you out of my council, so you have to listen to me. And if you don't want to, I don't give a damn, man. So I'm the complete ruler, I'm the supreme ruler here, and whatever I say needs to be okay. So moving on, where were we? Yeah, third point or third feature is it provided for the associations of Indians with the executive council of the viceroy and governor. So up until now, whenever we say that non-official members were introduced, increased and expanded and all that, we were talking about only the legislative council of the governor general or the viceroy, same thing. So you must remember, as I am sure you do know that, or maybe you do, that the viceroy had two councils, right? The legislative council and the executive council. So up until now, all the operations, all the experiments were happening with the legislative councils. But now this act provided that you also introduced Indians to the executive council also. Give them some real work, give them some real powers. Okay, so HP, small HP to you. So Satyendra Prasad Sinha, he was the first Indian. He was a really great man. I mean that he had some really great deeds to his name. He was the first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council, and he was ordained as the law member. Okay, so he was the part of the law ministry. Fourth feature or fourth point, it introduced the system of communal representation, however for Muslims only, by accepting separate electorates. So like communal representation, oh yeah, I already written it. Wow, I'm such a great guy, and nice one also. So communal representation is people from a particular community only to be elected by votes from the members of their own community. So this is not how I would have explained it. I've taken it from some online source, of course. So communal representation basically means giving representation to their community. This is how I would say it, like giving some adequate representation through their community. So they created separate electorates for this. So separate electorate basically means that the members of a particular community will stand for elections, and only their members will elect them, or only their community members can vote to elect those members. Lord Minto is also known as the father of communal electorates. Wow, communal electorate. So these communal electorates, you must remember, or these separate electorates were only for Muslims up until now, of course. And now comes the Government of India Act of 1919. So it's very, remember, 1919. Look at the date. I mean, 1919, right? Very easy to remember. Lord, focus. So Montagu, these are also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Now Montagu was the SOS for India, that is Secretary of State, and Chelmsford was the Viceroy. So first feature, the act demarcated and separated the central and provincial subjects. Each could make laws according to their respective subjects. However, the structure of the government was still centralized or center dominative or center heavy. So you can say that this act now demarcated or it differentiated or it separated the central and provincial subject. That is, it divided into two parts, the subjects on which the center could make laws and the province could make laws, much like our what's it, central list and the state list, the union, yeah, sorry, it's very similar to our union list and state list, but there was no concurrent list. And however, this was still center dominated. It means that there was no actual there was no separate concurrent list, but it was decided that if the center decided that they want to make this law or they want to modify this law this way, then the center's decision would prevail over the province's decision. That's why it was still center dominative, or you can say centralized or center heavy, whichever word you want to choose. I've given you three options. So a small HP to you again. So British India was divided into two parts, as I've already told you. First is British Indian territories and second were the princely states. The first one were ruled by governors who were members of the British government. The legislative assemblies, provincial, did not have the power to make laws for their provinces. So before this act came into being, the legislative assemblies of the governors, or you can say the provincial legislative assemblies, they did not have any power to make, like I've written here, before the act of 1990, they could not make laws for their own provinces. The center would make laws for their provinces, and I don't know what the legislative councils would do actually. Why the legislative council was there if it could not make laws? Both the legislative councils at central level and provincial levels were only advisory bodies. So now it comes, so they were basically only advisory bodies, and their advisors, or their you can say their come on man, I can't find the words. I mean, the governors or the viceroys, they weren't bound to listen to the legislative council. They were only like kind of acting bodies. It was customary, however, like I've told you previously, it was a kind of formality. It was customary to discuss and debate any law that the viceroy wanted to pass, but he was not obliged to follow up on their advices or consider their suggestions. So beautifully written. Again, a little more HP to you. The viceroy was also known as the Governor General of India. Like I've said previously, you will find in many internet sources or some old books that the viceroy is referred to as the Governor General of India. It would not be wrong to say though. Now, a big HP to you, I think. For India, both the Viceroy and the British government made laws. For the Indian subcontinent, both the Viceroy and the British government, they both made laws and could make laws. Alright. The laws made by the viceroy and his council were immediately. Now you must be wondering, right? You must be wondering for a long time that if the viceroy and his legislative council is there, obviously, and the legislative council is making laws for the provinces, then what the hell is the secretary of state and his fucking council doing, right? I mean, that's a legit question, because previously I told you that all the administration and all the legislative work and all of this was under the Secretary of State for India and not the Viceroy. The Viceroy is only Executive Council. But here I am telling you that the Viceroy keeps on making laws and laws, and his Legislative Council is also fed up of him making so many laws, because he feels like a stupid prince on a Titanic, right? But now we'll uncover the truth. तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं, like in that sense. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that the laws made by the viceroy and his council were immediately enacted, but were then also discussed in the British parliament. So viceroy is one guy, right? One guy cannot make laws for for a fucking country of like millions of people, a huge subcontinent like India. A single person cannot make laws. I mean, even he's not even obliged to listen to his council, which are sitting there dumb faced like idiots. I mean, he's not even obliged. So it's like giving the control of a whole continent to one single person. And that is why I told, like I said previously, the matter of creating laws, of enacting these laws and all those legislative all those acts and reforms, they were under the Secretary of State for India and his council. However, I mean, the main job, the main work for making laws was for SOS or for India and his council. They did the main work of creating the laws and acts for India. But the viceroy also had the power. It means that if the viceroy wanted to make any laws for India, he was free to do so. It's not like he cannot do so at any cost. I mean, he could do so, and if he wanted to do so, he could. But these acts also would be immediately enacted. They would immediately take place. They would immediately come into force after being passed by the viceroy's council. But then they will also be discussed in the British parliament, and there they would decide the fate of the act passed by the viceroy, that whether we should continue this, we should continue to allow this act, or we need to reject it. So the main power was with the British parliament. It's like that the viceroy has made a law, or has made an act, and he has implemented it. Okay, so the act is in force. It's working just like any other would. But at the same time, it is also being discussed in the British parliament that do we allow it, that do we let it move on, or like let it be, or do we reject it, that do we remove the act. So it was ultimately, the final decision was with the British parliament. And who was the representative of the Indian subcontinent in the British parliament? The Secretary of State, obviously. So they didn't fucking knew like what was, the British parliament didn't have a clue of what was happening in India, and no that the Secretary of State, obviously. But the Secretary of State, like, he was supposed to know exactly what was happening in India, so he would act like, oh man, I know everything about India, and this is good, and this is not good. So if the Secretary for State of India and the Viceroy had some bad blood between them, then the Secretary of State for India would prevail over him, because ultimately the British Parliament would be responding to the Secretary of State for India and not to the Viceroy. They would be in touch with SOS for India and not the Viceroy. And obviously the British Parliament had the ultimate power. So the British Parliament was a supermost power or authority when it came to enacting laws in British India. The relationship between the Secretary of State for India and the Viceroy are similar, or as similar to the law minister and the army general. So to explain the relationship, I've given you a little bit of example here. Like, imagine that the Secretary of State for India is the law minister in our current times. So he's the law minister, and the Viceroy is compared to the army general, where the law minister is the Secretary for State for India and the army general the Viceroy. The SOS, that is Secretary of State, is responsible for creating the laws, and the Viceroy is responsible for executing them, right? However, just like the army general can make any laws for his army, the Viceroy can for British India. The army can be compared to British Indian territories. So just like there's a law minister or defense minister, you can say, sorry, what am I saying, law minister, Oh, really sorry, I've written it wrong here. I didn't mean to write law minister here. I actually meant to write, where is it, defense minister. So just like there is a defense minister, right? So defense minister, whatever the defense minister discussed with his council, and whatever laws he passed will be applied to the army, to all the forces all over India, right? So he has the final and complete ultimate say in it. But the army general can pass laws on his own, right? And they would be followed throughout the army. The army cannot deny that we will not follow the army general's orders or laws created by him. We will only follow orders or laws created by the defense minister. The army general can by himself also apply or form laws that apply to the whole of the army. And if the defense minister feels that these laws are not good or these are unnecessary or something like that, he doesn't feel that the law is right, then he can repeal it also. So basically you can say that the final say is with the secretary of state, but the viceroy is also allowed to make laws on his own. And the army here can be compared to British Indian territories. So imagine it like the British Indian territories, and their foremost ruler is the viceroy, and the viceroy then responds to the secretary of state for India. But in this case the army general is considered inferior to the defense minister, right? But at that time the SOS for India and the viceroy were not considered inferior or superior. Now the second feature, now we're talking about the feature, further divided the provincial subjects into two parts. Now if you remember the previous feature, like in the previous feature we talked about how it separated the functions into union list and the state list. Though it did not give name, it did not specifically say that we have created a union list and a state list and like that and that. It just simply separated the subjects. Into what manner, in which way, I do not know, I have no clue, and I thought it would be unnecessary to delve so much deep into it. And the second point, what it even divided the provincial subjects into two more parts. So it had already divided the subjects into two parts, that is central subjects and provincial subjects. And the provincial subjects are further divided into two more parts, that is transfer subjects and reserved subjects. Now pay attention to this one. Transferred subjects were placed under the control of the provincial legislature. So these transfer subjects were placed under the control of who? The control of, oh my god, I'm feeling so sleepy right now. My brain stopped working, it's lagging. So the transferred subjects, that is the first part, were placed under the control of the provincial legislature, that is the legislature of the province, and were to be administered by the ministers responsible to the legislature. Here I put a inverted commas here. It means I'm trying to stress on it, that ministers responsible to the legislature. And who were those ministers? They were like our current cabinet ministers, same as our cabinet ministers. Ministers responsible to the legislature are nothing but elected or chosen ministers that were part of the governor's legislative council. Executive council, that were part of the control of the provincial legislature and were to be administered. So they're saying that the transferred subjects were to be ruled, or you can say that the transferred subjects were to be operated by the executive council of the governors and their members and the members of the executive. It's basically the same thing, yeah. So the transferred subjects were actually given to the executive members of the governor's legislature, and the reserved subjects were given to the reserved subjects were to be administered by the governors and their executive councils without being responsible to the legislative council, to the legislative cabinet ministers or those who held specific portfolios. Okay, alright. So there's a little bit of confusion in here, and obviously all of this confusion is created due to my sleepy brain. So before moving on, I hope you all know the difference between the legislative council and the executive council, right? I mean, executive council, if you sum it up, it's basically the cabinet ministers. So sum up group up all the cabinet ministers, and that's your executive council. And the legislative council is the all the cabinet ministers, that is ministers who have formed the government, you can say. And all the MLAs, MPs, and all that, like those who are elected from their separate, like their electorates, they've been elected from their electorates, but they haven't formed the government. They also form part of the legislative council. However, in the executive council, only the topmost cabinet members can get in. I'm assuming that you all are at least this much intelligent to know the difference between cabinet ministers, and like to know the difference between legislative and executive council. It's not a big deal. Executive council are active ministers. Like for example, if I take our government in today's time, so executive council is made up of all the ministers of the BJP party, who have different portfolios under them, like the defense minister, the home minister, the road and transport minister. All these form of the executive, all of these form of the prime minister's executive council, or you can say the president's, because the president is actually the head of our government constitutionally. And the legislative council is all those other MLAs and MPs that sit in the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha and discuss and debate all the time. They and